Okay, so what's up, man?
Not much. Everything's been going pretty swimmingly, and I was excited to hear from you because I was wondering how you were doing. And it's always nice to see you on the YouTube feed, and now it's even better because I'm talking to you.
Yeah, I've been trying to find a way to get you back on so we could have a conversation and I could utilize your life coaching skills. But I wanted to find a way to also make that content because I'm a busy little bee and I'm trying to do two things at once. So
Yeah.
this is a friend conversation, but it's also I do have some serious stuff I want to talk about. But it's like very loose notes. But first, I wanted to ask you about your trip to India. I saw a couple little updates on that, and I wanted to hear from you. How was that? It was like a bit of a spiritual pilgrimage for you, huh?
Yeah, it was a spiritual and like actual practical, religious kind of a pilgrimage. So, in case your listeners don't know, Buddhism has primarily like four holy sites. The four holy sites were basically Buddha himself said, "Remember these spots." So that's why they're four holy sites. But then there's other stupas, which are like kind of towers commemorating the importance of some sites. So all in all, there's like around 10 sites, and so the pilgrimage is around northern India and parts of Nepal, going through all the sites.
Okay.
And yeah, it was I think very eye-opening in terms of even though I had no expectations, it was just a really good example of how the world as you experience it when you are in your world, like you're looking far ahead and you're looking at all these different things. And so, with your diverse experience, you may think you're very well, traveled. You may think that you know the world pretty well. But then once you go to like a completely different civilization, right?
Yeah.
Like a country and with like its own 1,000 years old culture, we're all humans, but then the way we carry ourselves as human is so completely different, and it really opens you up to like a completely new dimension of thinking about the human experience. Like, wow, all the things that I thought were like human behaviors were just like my cultural behavior,
Yeah.
and I can see that it's so different. And there's like a million things I could talk about, but I think that's the biggest takeaway. Like the human experience is actually so unbound. So it's I remind myself all the time, like, hey, you know, it's just whenever I feel myself getting rigid in my thoughts, it's like, oh wait, but when I went to India, this was like completely not a thing. So that really helps me shift in and out of like sometimes you do need that rigid thinking, right? But then when I find myself getting too rigid, I can open up again, and then it's just a really wonderful experience.
See, this is why I like talking to you because you really you bolster idea that I'm trying to get at without even knowing it, just intuitively. So I wanted to discuss a little bit before we move on from the India trip. Like, okay, so the overarching experience like in America right now is like one of like fear of prosecution is like a big thing that's rippling through. And you went to a state that I mean India, it goes through ebbs and flows, but it has at the currently its president is a Hindu fascist political figure, and so there's I don't know specifically because I didn't want to do too much research for this. I wanted it to be more fun and thoughtful than actual like going through information. But the going to another nation that doesn't have maybe as many like social bars from persecution happening, and particularly you being a foreigner in an unknown land and that part of the persecuted religious group. How did you feel any type of way going there and like walking around and like knowing, being aware of any of that?
Yeah, so that's like one of the bigger moments of me. Like, I remember pre 9/11 flight. And man, those are some different times, right? Like when you go to the airport and the TSA is like so chill. I remember flying to America. I remember flying to Canada pre 9/11. It's like so chill. So, but now things have changed, obviously, right? Okay, so I arrived at India and I arrived at Delhi, but I needed to take a domestic flight to Varanasi. But much to my, much to my unexpectedness, in India, domestic flights are actually more security tight.
Oh, interesting.
So I was just expecting, oh, it's a domestic flight, so I just don't even need to take off my shoes. I just put stuff on and then I'm gonna cruise out of here. But no, like I had to open up everything and then show them and then basically do full body scan and then so there was like, this is so crazy because like this is a domestic flight. And also in India, you can't enter the airport unless you have a boarding pass that's like within a time frame.
Okay.
So many people arrive and then they want to grab a smoke or something and then they want to wait and then come in again, right? Guess what? You can't. So I learned that actually it's because of a lot of the religious domestic terrorism in India.
Yeah, I was about to ask.
Yeah, so I was like, wow, okay, so that's mind blowing. And then another thing I experienced as a foreigner, right, is there's no concept of like personal space because the density is so high. But what's really weird is nobody actually like you would expect like pickpocketing and kind of like miscellaneous kind of small time misdemeanors like you would expect from a European travel, right?
Yeah, or even
But
subway in New
actually,
York.
yeah, but actually, while people are all up in your face, the actual there's no like try attempt to mug or anything like that even as a foreigner, which was really weird to me because it's like, wait, I feel like you've done half the job of like successfully pickpocketing me and then not
Right.
doing it, right?
Right.
But in terms of being prosecuted and things like that, and I think it does help that I was part of like a group pilgrimage, right? But I don't think the government of India is really that big on caring about foreigner influence simply because in the Hindu system, social hierarchy system, right?
Yeah.
Like foreigners are outside. And so they don't really deserve that much of an attention, is what I
Hmm.
gathered from the experience. They would rather think of the inter-caste relations and they would rather enforce within the caste system. Like, for example, although it is prohibited by law, culturally, it is still very frowned upon to mix castes in your social networks and things like that, right? Even in America, Indians will engage in that kind of behavior, so that becomes a problem too. So, religion wise, also Buddhism has largely been absorbed by Hinduism.
Hmm.
So it's kind of like, oh, that's when we say we're Buddhists, it's like, oh, that's cute. You're like a sub branch of Hinduism, and it's like,
Right.
well, no, not really. But then from their perspective, it's like, yes, really.
Yeah.
So
It,
when you
it,
go to Buddha,
culturally it sure beats expelling you on sight, because
yeah,
that's the reason why India, well, not the main reason, a lot of it had to do with imperialism, but India was partitioned into two separate states. One's supposed to be a Hindu state and one's supposed to be a Buddhist state, with what, Sri Lanka was supposed to be the Buddhist state, something like that.
yeah,
But
and there's a whole lot of history behind like, cause Sri Lanka also had like other religious influences, but then there was this great debate among the religious people, and then there was such a great impression of the Buddhist debater, and everyone was like, whoa, like instantly converted, right? So Sri Lanka, and but yeah, religion. So the thing about India is that it's not really one country, like it's actually like a continent, like Europe.
hmm
So while it is for the sake of convenience by the English people, while it is, categorized as one country, when you actually go into it, it can't be like more different, each part, with their language, with their distinct culture, with their food, with their how they dress and everything, right? So what unites Indians isn't language. What unites Indians isn't race, because they all have different, like, depending on where
Hmm.
you are in India. So religion is the big driving force of what unifies India, right? And that is like it's something that you really gotta feel, and it's like, wow, the human experience can be like this, because India is so homogeneous experientially, but when you look at the races of people, and when you look at how they dress, and when you look at how they conduct themselves, even in one same city, how the vastly different the experience is, it's like, wow, they don't speak the same language, they don't talk, like, that's why they speak English there, right? To facilitate intercommunication, because Hindi is just one language out of that many languages, right? So it's like, wow. But what gives the same experience of this person's an Indian and this person's an Indian, and it's the practice of how they conduct life through Hinduism, and it's like, that's pretty. I can see why the English said something along the lines of like, you really, really can't get rid of Hinduism in India.
Yeah, yeah, it's like culturally inextricable from the landmass itself. I think I think in the same way, maybe not originally, but nowadays, the United States, a lot of the shared culture between people is Christianity. Uh, Maybe, well, definitely not to even the same extent, but to the same lengths they go to enforce that through nationalism. And so to sort of shift over a little bit to the domestic front, so and you could definitely like I don't want to go too deep into your personal opinions on things unless you want to, because this is such a like sticky time for for either of us. And I did want to talk about this for a second. So you're an immigrant who is now a legal citizen, correct? Or
Nope, I'm a permanent resident.
permanent resident. See, and I'm not good at differentiating all these things. I just
Yep,
know
yep.
I know you're an immigrant, and I'm a Latino, and I have what could be described as gang tattoos. Now, they're not literally gang tattoos, but the FBI has juggalos as a gang in their databases, and I have a Hatchet Man tattoo on my chest. So, like, when I see these stories of permanent residents being deported to El Salvador for having these loose gang ties through their tattoos, it makes, especially with this lack of due process, it makes me alarmed, and it makes me alarmed for people I know like you who are permanent residents but don't have those other things going on, but are just as much of a danger of being wrapped into a system because of the lack of due process. And while the Supreme Court ruled to return the person who was mistakenly sent to El Salvador, they did also rule that the Alien Enemies Act is constitutional to use currently, even though we're not in a wartime scenario. So, I guess the first thing I would ask you is like, okay, so historically, in times of like persecution, we see pretty extreme protest acts, and specifically with one of the topics that has been major, especially involving these deportations, and actually ties, in a weird way, ties in culturally to not Hindu, Buddhism, is the war in Gaza, because multiple people so far, two people to be specific, have self-immolated in the United States from as a protest for the war in Gaza. There was a woman in Atlanta, and there was Aaron Bushnell, I think, did it in D.C. But both of them basically like killed themselves as a protest act, self-immolation, and it reminded a lot of people of the protests against Buddhist persecution in Vietnam before the Vietnam War really kicked off, where this Buddhist monk self-immolated. I can't pronounce his name. It's Thich
Yeah,
Quang Duc, something like that.
yeah, yep.
Yeah. So I guess my question from that point would be like what uh what do you think the like weight of responsibility for someone who is in the crosshairs right now is to also be involved in these movements of like civil rights movements and anti-war protests? Do you think that there is more harm reduction in people who are under those sites to stay quiet and sort of try to keep their peace, or do you think they should be out there the same way as citizens who are white, not threatened at all currently right now?
Yeah. So this actually is very close to my heart, right? Because while I'm an immigrant now, I started out as an international student. So, when you're an international student, you have so many things you have to worry about in terms of paperwork. And then you just kind of like to see these news articles about international students that just get picked up off the street and they're just like yeeted somewhere else. That was like wow, like that spoke very close to my heart, right? Because I was in that shoe before. I was always worried about things. I was so anxious about like TSA and immigration related everything. And also, I read the story of the Canadian person deported and not deported, like taken to a custody in Arizona when she tried to enter through Mexico and things like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, in terms of what you need to be doing as a response to this, depending on where your standing is. Before we talk about that, right? I think it's important to zoom out a little bit. And when we look at the human condition itself, right? Right now, all the things that are happening because it can, right? So we need to think about what makes these things allowable in the first place. Because while it's bad for me, there are people who are genuinely happy about this. And so when we talk about World War II Germany, there's a lot of like, I was just following orders, right? And so
Even
Jesus.
watching Showa, not to interrupt you for too long, but even watching Showa, which is like a 5-6 hour long documentary on the aftermath of the Holocaust, I was freaked out and couldn't stop. I watched like much more like graphic documentaries, but watching this, I couldn't really finish it because they were talking to German citizens and they were very much like, we didn't really know what was going on. We thought he was doing good stuff. I mean, we saw them getting put on trains and getting sent up here, and we were like, whatever. But yeah, continue.
Yeah, and so when Jesus was being crucified, right? Jesus did not hold hatred in his heart. And he actually prayed, "Forgive them, Father, for they do not know their sin." So basically, there's this Roman guard who's like stabbing Jesus. Hey man, come on, die quickly, right? But to them, that's like their honest day of work. Like a farmer would farm, software engineer would code, warden has to warden, prison guard has to prison guard, executioner has to execute, right? So Jesus understands that they don't know, what they're doing outside of their perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Well, this is just my job, right? So Jesus saw no point in harboring hatred for them and like, oh, this guy is giving me so much suffering, right? Jesus understood that this is the circumstance. Same with Buddha, right? So the important thing is we have to understand these things are happening because a sizable mass of the population actually do not care that much about people in our situations. Moreover, like, I don't know, what do you think about the politics of Korea? They went through like impeachment and the removal of office, and now they're gonna have an election soon. But like, you don't care, right? It's
Right.
just you're not Korean. You just know some Korean guys like me, but then you don't vote in Korea. You don't live in Korea. You have no vested interest in Korea. So so basically, to the people, to a sizable mass of people living in the United States, that is how they think. But I'm trying to say is they're kind of living their day to day, like the documentary you saw. They were like, I mean, like business as usual. And now we have to. This sounds like it sucks so much. Like it sounds horrible, but we have to when we put them in our perspective, right? Suppose you're having a wonderful day in Colorado, and then a group of Korean protesters, right? They come up all in your face and then they say you need to support the Korean government for party X. You're like, oh, all right. But then they get really aggressive about it, right? Like, no, this is like a human rights issue. Then you're like, okay, I get it, man, but I'm just trying to have a nice day at the park with my daughter, right? But number one, that doesn't mean that the situation in the protest isn't dire. It is, from their perspective.
Right.
But also, number two, from your perspective, you have no reason to care. So, when we think about activism, yes, radicalism tends to get the job done by providing a lot of high visibility and a lot of sensationalism. It draws a lot of attention. But because of that, it has the associated risk of, man, do they really need to be doing that? They're overreacting. Why? Because they don't have that empathy in the first place. And also, again, I'm trying to reiterate, the lack of empathy isn't bad. Anybody thinks that for causes that aren't happening to them. So, a popular criticism for I think both sides of the aisle is that, oh, you don't care about it until it happens to you. But again, looking at the human condition, would I think about the Zimbabwean elections? Would I care that deeply about like Syria has a new government now, right?
Yeah.
So it's like
It's
we
almost
have to
like bad for your health to try to care about everything at once like that, you know?
exactly. So if we truly want to meet in the middle ground, like I want you to come to the middle ground, but I can't control you. But I still want you to change while not changing anything about myself. That's a losing gambit. I can self-immolate. I'm not saying self-immolation is bad or like meaningless. But I can do all these things, but something that we don't consider often because it kind of correlates to losing. It kind of correlates to sympathizing with the abusers. Is actually look at things from their perspective and actually offer them a reason why they should care, right? And that kind of communication, when it's all up in your face, like, I don't know, like if I'm talking about Buddhism and peace, right? But if I was all up in your face about how you should practice meditation, you have resistance to it too, because again, you're just trying to live your day, right? So I think so that's about me, right? Like the kind of activism that I engage in is number one, talking about the international student experience, because you see, some people are like this. Some people react to the international student situation like this. Well, you shouldn't have engaged in those things if you were on a visa. So another person who got deported is had a DUI record, but it was expunged. But nevertheless, there was a DUI. And another person in the internment, not internment, like in the containing cell in Arizona with the Guardian article about the Canadian person, it was an Indian student who overstayed her visa like 3 days. Okay, so many critics are like, well, if you're on a visa and you didn't want legal trouble, then why do you do that? But what they fail to understand, because again, not to their own fault, they just don't live that life. What do you do when you're a student and you don't have the money to get out on time and then something critical happens? What if I have appendicitis on the day I'm supposed to travel? Right?
Right. Well, it's
Like
not
a
taking into
DUI.
account any of the human experience involved.
Yeah, so the DUI. So what caused that person to drink and drive? Like, what if their mental health was failing so hard and they didn't have the money to afford, like, mental health care in America? So they try to take matters into their own hands, and then that happens, right? Again, until it happens to you, of course, you don't care. And I have no hatred for the people who don't care about these things because, again, that's what humans are gonna do on a natural basis. So, that is why I think, in general, I advocate for activism in terms of actually talking to the other person. But, if it is your desire to participate in activism, I think you cannot expect everything to go hunky-dory because you believe super hard in your principle. If you are going to go that route, I think it is very important to remember. I'm gonna say to you, hey, you should wear green tomorrow. But it's up to you to not wear green, right?
Yeah.
So I can say, no, you don't understand. You have to wear green tomorrow. But again, it's up to you, right? Okay, so extending that logic, I can hold you in a cell and I can feed you just like gruel, and I can make you do physical labor, and I can starve you, I can put you in solitary confinement, and I can tell you, suffer! But it is up to me to suffer, right? Nobody has power to what is inside of us. So, if we are going to go the the route of activism, I think it's very important to understand, first of all, that nobody has access to what is here. But secondly, this is the last point I want to make. I saw a clip of the Inglorious Bastards on YouTube Shorts, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So in that movie, there's a German, soldier, and Brad Pitt is talking to them, and they're showing Brad Pitt is showing the guy a map, and it's like, you're gonna tell me where all of your buddies are, or my friend out here is gonna kill you. And the German is like, he's proud, right? No, I would rather die than rat out my comrades. And okay. So the Jewish bear comes, gets the baseball bat, and like splits the guy's head open. And then the rest of the Germans are like, hey, it's right here, right? And one of the comments said, you see, noble death is so pointless. Like, that guy died for his principles only for the, next guy to rat everyone else out. And the Germans lost.
Right.
So what kind of dogshit death is that, right? When you look at it, again, from the zoomed out perspective, all death is kind of like that. Because life is life and death is death. Like, things will happen in terms of political, influences. Some things will happen, some things will die down, some things will happen, some things will die down. When you look at it from the grand perspective, all life and all death is virtually not that meaningful because life itself is not supposed to be meaningful, right? We live first and then we can afford to search for meaning. It's not the other way around. We're not born because of some meaning.
Right.
So it's a balance, right? I'm not saying this so that you should be like, oh, forget everything, nothing is. No, that's not why I'm saying this. If you're too zoomed in and you're suffering, again, there's no point in suffering through anything. If I'm gonna be an activist, I would rather be a happy activist who is an activist for the entire rest of my life. I don't want to be so passionately in activism and then suffer so much, get burnt out like crazy, and never do anything with activism like after 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
No. Any meaningful change requires time and sustained effort. So, if you're too zoomed in and you're too suffering, it's good to zoom out every once in a while. But if you're zoomed out and everyone's in, being taken away and you're not doing anything, might be time to reassess what makes me so indifferent. Because we're all in this together, whether we like it or not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a really good answer. And I do think it's a really hard thing to wrestle with, especially those really grand acts of self-sacrifice, particularly because it's something that becomes a story for other people more than an effective policy changing tool. I mean, I was only reading it for a short moment before we started, so there might be more repercussions, but even in that example of the Buddhist monk who self-immolated, there was policy change that was promised afterwards, but ultimately nothing got passed and nothing changed. And same as in these modern scenarios where the war in Gaza has only gotten worse in all of this after all this protesting. But I do think at the same time there is a wrestling with how a sacrifice like that might motivate other people. There's the concept of martyrdom in Islam, and like at a certain point, for people who have nothing but their lives, giving up your life is the only thing that you really can do for political change. But that might not be sustainable. That it actually isn't by definition sustainable because you're dead. So yeah, it's definitely something to wrestle with, and I think the extent that people decide to do it in the U.S. at this particular moment, it has to be one of those moments where the people who are more protected by the law, in the sense of fascism as well, because fascism does have outgroups and in-groups, and we need people in those in-groups to be the loudest right now. But I do think there's a responsibility for everybody by everybody, and I think it's interesting because a lot of the people who support what's happening right now feel that same way. They just feel it in like a Dr. Demento reverso type of way, where the way we're going to balance everything and bring everybody to this place of light is by punishing other people and by getting rid of immigrants and by sort of sterilizing the genetic flow of the country in a way, which is like there's a whole discussion that could be had about like the racial implications and the eugenics of it all, but because when these things get really extreme, like with the Muslim travel ban, it always attacks brown groups in America. It's all enforcing white supremacy, and so if that's going to be the way the cookie crumbles and the way fascism forms in America, white people need to stand up and protect people like you and me, and come out. But I do agree with this the concept of not allowing yourself to suffer when you take on the responsibility of an activist. And I think Mahmoud Khalil is a really good example of that, because while he's been held in this Louisiana facility, with his family 1,000 miles away in a whole different state. Even after the immigration judge ruled that he can be deported on the word of the Secretary of State Marco Rubio alone, he still stood up and said, this is wrong. There's a reason why I was brought to this court, and we will keep fighting until the last moment. And I think that at a time like this, we do all need to become obstructionists in a way, and everybody who does get in trouble needs to try to gunk it up as much as they can. But I'm also worried that like the less these mass deportation programs succeed, the more people are going to get streamlined into things like the El Salvadoran prison or our domestic prison system. And all of that's just to say, like, balance your risks for everybody out there. And like myself, I'm out here doing this YouTube channel, which is probably enough to get the Secretary of State on my ass if he were to find me. But I think if everybody were to speak out, there's no point in them going after specific people like that. So I think that's a big part of it. And yeah, so switch over and let's try to look on the optimistic side of this a little bit. And I'm as someone who is a secularist, sometimes I'm in a dire need of spiritual advisement. So while you're my friend, you're also the closest thing to a pastor I have. So I'm gonna look for some inspirational words from you now. And I have a couple of like prompts. I'm gonna twist you and let you go. So there are a couple things. The first prompt being how to cope with when the world is how to cope when the world is changing drastically around you. What would be your answer to that? Like what's a good way to keep yourself stable while the ground around you is unstable?
There is never a moment where the world is actually static. And also, just because things outside of you are moving doesn't mean that you are moving. And this sounds very like Zen, but it's the truth. Is there any moment where things are truly just still? Yeah, when you look at like a microsecond. But we keep having this idea that things are changing, but we keep thinking that it's constant. But that is a sensory mistake on our part. But because of the way we are configured, we are liable to repeat that multiple times. We have to understand this trait. So, it is a human trait to require food. We can't will ourselves to not eating food, although we can manage hunger better. So just like that, we have to understand. Oh, here I fall into this very human trap of believing things are going to always stay. So, that's not the truth. And while I feel like things are different now, things have always been the same in terms of always been changing. And nothing like the example, wear green tomorrow example. Nothing can change me but me. So that's the first prompt.
Right. I think that's a really good answer, and I do think that it's definitely like a bit of human brain bias to even think that things aren't changing at all in the first place. And I mean, it's easy to even look like 20 years, like literally what 5 years ago we just ended the war in Afghanistan after 15 years, killed something like 23 million people or something like that. An insane amount of people dead over the course of 2 decades, and a lot of people domestically don't even acknowledge that that really happened or that we were really responsible for that. I mean, all it is nowadays is like a little bit of a like a political token when they talk about the withdrawal from Afghanistan, but always no discussion of that. And before that, Iraq. So yeah, it goes to say that these really drastic times where lots of people are dying and in danger are very consistent in our world, and we've never really found a real middle ground. And maybe the idea that people think for a second that the world was peaceful goes to show that they are very shut off from the rest of the world and from their neighbors and from everything around them. The next prompt would be how to cope when you feel you may specifically be in danger. Whether that danger is imminent, whether that danger is hypothetical. How to cope with that? How to feel safe when you're in danger?
Yep. So, what's the biggest danger outside of death? Nothing. Just because you're safe, are you not gonna die? Nope. You're gonna die anyway. Just because you are in danger, are you guaranteed to die? Nope. Somebody can shoot me, but it can narrowly miss my artery, or I can fall down on the street and then instant death. We are all going to die within the next 100 years or so. There's no getting around that. Everybody watching this podcast is gonna die within the next 100 years or so. So, in the grand scheme of things, just because you're safe, are you exempt from death until 100 years later? No, you never know when you're gonna die anyway. So if you're gonna die anyway, and you don't know when you're gonna die anyway, we have to understand that it's a massive energy expenditure for us to constantly think about this when it's gonna come anyway. And which brings us to the question. So why do I say nothing is a bigger danger than death? Like, what if you get tortured? Again, I may be tortured, but no one can force me to suffer. So this is I usually take cold showers at home. And I have a very, much to the dismay of my wife, I have a very low standard of hygiene, right? Compared to her. Okay, so when I go to India, right? No electricity, no reliable electricity. Also, no water heating. So, all the people who are used to living in warm showers and nice meals all the time, they suffer. But, no problem for me. I'm gonna take a shower. Aren't you cold? I am, but I'm used to it. But, are people who live there like it's their normal life? But compared to the first world person, that life is torture. But to this person, it's not. As long as you are alive, no matter what somebody does to you, there is never a moment where you are not in charge of your own happiness. You're gonna die anyway. So, when you die, do you think you're gonna be glad that you spent all this time thinking about dying? No, you're gonna regret not having lived more. So if you're gonna do that in the future, why are you spending time? Now, I'm not talking about you specifically.
Yeah.
Why
No,
are you spending so much time thinking and worrying about death and safety? Right? When you die, and you look at your oppressor as they're, I don't know, injecting you with the lethal poison, wouldn't it be really sad to die with grudge? And this is in the sutra, right? Do not hold a grudge. Do not hold suffering in your heart as you die. The Buddha condemns that. I do a life coaching, but it's actually death coaching. I'm gonna die very happily because I know that I spent every living moment doing what I loved. But I have some of my clients are incarcerated, and some of my clients are divorcing. They're going through a lot of suffering. But when they die, is dying better than one more alive day in prison? Is dying better than one more day of going through divorce papers? Nothing triumphs living and nothing is worse than death. But even death is not a reason to suffer. Because again, it's gonna come anyway.
Yeah, it's guaranteed for all of us. And I do it makes me really specifically think about the people who are dying in mass right now, how they have to cope with death around them, and the concept of martyrdom, and all these things. Our culture is very death averse. American culture, especially popular American culture, is very, very death averse, scared of death, and almost in a type of deep denial about it. Uh, like even it's a whole industry is keeping people young in this world, but in this country specifically. Um, and yeah, that's definitely that type of thinking is part of what has got us here. This fear of death and this because the reason why, and this is a big bone to give to all these people who want to oppress people right now, is the reason why they're wanting to oppress people is because they're scared, is because they feel like they're in danger, because some of them are in danger, and because the way that they process this danger is that they want a drastic solution, and this is something we've talked a little bit about before, but like this drastic solution for crime and for people who are causing suffering, it's a cascading effect, and it leads to more suffering. It doesn't actually help the solution. And restorative justice is a much better concept, and that concept being adopted by society writ large would suspend a lot of these massive processes that are going on to hurt people right now. It would suspend them immediately if people understood that this type of lack of empathy is going to come back and hurt them. I mean, even with foreign students, it may not be as prominent in America to send your child across seas to get to school, but it's something some people do, and I find it strange that people can't even think of, like, for a second, these foreign students as their children, as like these could be your children. Young people are often anti-war, and these anti-war protests are done by young people. And but yeah, so I think that's probably a good place to end it. I appreciate you talking to me. We're gonna chat for a second after this, but this is
Yeah,
like
but
the
before we part, I want to have some concluding remarks, right?
yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so there's two things I want to impart. Number one is about the Buddhist monk in Vietnam, Thích Quang Duc. And, you know, when you meditate, it's actually really hard, right? So, meditating is really hard because you have to do nothing. So people have a really short attention span, right? So they lament the fact that they can't, stay focused on one topic for a, extended period of time.
Right.
But they can't even do nothing for an extended period of time. So doing nothing is the easiest thing, right? So if you can't do nothing for a sustained period of time, chances are you can't do anything for a sustained period of time. Okay, so meditation is hard. You do nothing. But, number one, you get antsy. Number two, your back hurts. Number three, your hip starts hurting. Number four, you get random itches on the body. You get hungry. Number five, your knees hurt. Number six, your ankles hurt. And then it just starts hurting everywhere because you're in a rigid formation for a prolonged period of time, yeah? And you're supposed to hold meditation even when someone is calling you and tapping on your shoulder because you decided to meditate. Okay, now simplify that. You're on fire, which is the worst pain known to mankind.
Yeah, impossible to even conceive of from someone who hasn't experienced it.
And you are in tranquility. Because while my body may burn, in here there is peace that nobody else can touch but me. That is the ultimate display that Thich Quang Duc did. It's not like and some, I think the first lady at the time called it a monk barbecuing. But why that's so powerful is you can do anything to me, and nothing can touch what's inside. And that is the message that he wanted to send to all of his students, right? In the Buddhist, Sangha.
Right.
The important thing is, especially when times are tough, we have to learn how to connect to here. Number two, I recently saw a very interesting YouTube video about the history of continents. So when we think about the history of continents, we think about Pangaea, right? Because that's what we think of, like the historic, like one plate, everyone is in the same continent kind of thing.
Yeah.
But actually, there was a lot of shifts prior to that, right? Okay, so when you just look at the above sea land, sometimes the one continent gets big and small, and you're like, wait, what? That I don't know how that works. So this YouTube video, what was so cool about it is they actually showed you the tectonic plate underneath. So as the tectonic plate gets shifted up like this, the land that's on this tectonic plate surfaces up. And then the land that's on this tectonic plate shifts down. But on the surface of it, when we're just looking at the planet from above, it looks like the land mass is growing and land mass is shrinking. But it's not, right?
Right.
But all the while these tectonic plates are moving, the mass of the Earth remains the same. So tectonic plate pushes down, melts into the core, goes down to the mantle, but then because of that pressure, it exerts outward and then it becomes another tectonic plate, right? You and I talked about the Hegelian, the thesis, antithesis, and the slave master, and all of that, right?
Yeah.
So that's a form of this tectonic shift. Right now, Asians in America are the minorities. Right now, Latinos in America are the minorities. But there was a time where Latinos were the actual majority, right? So that tectonic plate just happens to be shifted down. So right now, white people in America seem to have a lot of power. But I wouldn't think they actually have a lot of power because what minorities do seem to impact their happiness a lot. So who's in charge of their happiness?
Right.
Minorities, right? We have to look at it from the long run. Because immediately acting with a lot of passion, immediately acting to passion, again, we think it's meaningful, but it's not. What we need to be actually paying more attention to, in my opinion, is regardless of the war, regardless of the social situation, regardless of politics, feeding the hungry, taking care of the sick, being there for lonely people, right? These are the things that we don't need to be a political activist to do.
Right.
You can you can do those things today, and you can do those things for the rest of your life, and it will not depend on politics one day of your life. So that's my parting words.
No, I love that. I think that's perfect. This is Billy. He runs a channel called July Life Coach, and it's a really good resource for if you got questions about life and what you got to do to get yourself in order. So yeah, thank you for talking to me, and see you next time.
Yeah, thanks for having me again.
Yeah.